Article. Effects of head nodding and shaking motions on perceptions of likability and approachability. Takayuki Osugi. Department of Human Sciences and Cultural Studies, Yamagata University, Yamagata, Japan. Junai Kawahara. Department of Psychology, Hokkaido University, Sapporo, Japan. Abstract. It has been demonstrated that bowing motion of computer-generated female three-dimensional figures enhanced perceived attractiveness. Given that nodding and shaking head motions are used as communicative signals, such as signals of approval and denial, these motions could be expected to modulate perceived trait impressions of model faces. We used movie clips of the nodding and shaking head motions of computer-generated figures and examined the modulation effects of these motions on perceived trait impressions, i.e., attractiveness, likability, and approachability. The results showed that the nodding head motion significantly increased ratings of subjective likability and approachability relative to those of the shaking or control conditions, whereas the shaking motion did not influence the ratings. Furthermore, it was shown that a nodding head motion of the computer-generated models primarily increased likability attributable to personality traits, rather than to physical appearance. We concluded that head nodding motion is treated as information regarding approach-related motivations and enhances perceived likability. Keywords: head nodding, head shaking, trait impression, approach and avoidance, motivational tendency. Facial impressions critically eke social interaction in various situations, Dion, 1977, Fink. And Pentonvoke, 2002, such as sexual selection, Buss and Barnes, 1986, employment decisions. Cash and Kilcullen, 1985, and judgment about sentencing decision, Segal and Ostrov, 1975. The facial physical structure that can alter global impressions has been shown to modulate. Corresponding author: Takayuki Osugi, Department of Human Sciences and Cultural Studies, Yamagata University, Kojirikawamaki, January 4, 12. Yamagata City, Yamagata 990-8560, Japan. Email: tosugi@human.kj.yamagata-u.ac.jp. Perception. 2018, Volume 47, 1, 16-29. The author, S. 2017. Reprints and permissions. sagepub.co.uk/journalspermissions.nav. doi: 10.1177/03010066177332009. journals.sagepub.com/home/pec. Specific trait impressions, Todorov, Mandasija, Gorin, and Hall, 2005. Such judgments on facial impression can be established after 100 milliseconds of exposure to a face, Willis and Todorov, 2006, and these evaluations correlate with each other, Usterhoff and Todorov, 2008. These endings suggest that people evaluate multiple trait impressions, using facial appearance as a cue, and these evaluations predict social decisions. Recent studies measuring trait judgments have emphasized major impacts of social signals, such as gaze direction, Kyler and Leder. 2016, Mason, Tatkow, and McRae, 2005, Facial Expressions, Usterhoff and Rodorov, 2009. Porter, Coldhart, and Langdon, 2007, Rees et al., 1990, Face Direction, Camp, Frith, Dolan. And Frith, 2001, and Head Motion, Osugi and Kawahara, 2015. These social signals interact and enhance only in a specific situation, Smiling increases perceived physical attractiveness of a face only if it is also gazing directly to the raters, Jones, De Bruin, Little, Conway, and Feinberg, 2006. Therefore, a broad band of information regarding other actors' facial appearance and social information signaling the direction and valences of the cues are integrated. Argyll and Cook, 1976, Baron Cohen, 1995, Emery, 2000. One of the widely accepted hypotheses supporting a major impact of social cues on trait judgments is the behavioral motivational tendency to approach or avoid actors, example Adams and Kleck, 2003. For example, a direct gaze and a facial expression of joy convey common approach-related information, whereas an averted gaze and fear expression carry common avoidance-related information. Adams and Kleck, 2003-2005, found that approach-oriented emotions, example happiness, were speedily recognized if the face displayed a direct eye gaze, whereas avoidance orientations, example fearful, was speeded if it displayed an averted eye gaze. On the basis of this ending, the researchers concluded that a direct gaze and a facial expression of joy share common approach-related information, whereas an averted gaze and an expression of fear have common avoidance-related information. This suggests that facial expressions of emotion and gaze behavior are recognized as signals representing motivational tendencies, such as signals of approach and avoidance. We argue that head nodding and shaking motions are exemplars of approach-avoidance-related behaviors. Head nodding and shaking motions serve an important function in face-to-face communication. Duncan, 1972, Maynard, 1987, McClave, 2000. Persuasion, example Brinal and Petty, 2003, Forster and Strack, 1996, Wells and Petty, 1980. Impressions of gender and status, Dixon and Foster, 1998, Helwig Larson, Cunningham, Carico, and Pergram, 2004, and interactions with non-human conversational agents. Castle and Thoresen, 1999, Cowie 2010. However, previous studies involving nodding and shaking movements focused mainly on embodied cognition, such as interactions between the self-behavior, body feedback, and judgment of external stimuli. Example Forster and Strack, 1996, Tom, Peterson, Lau, Burton, and Cook, 1991, Tom, Rammel. Zapanta, Demir, and Lopez, 2006, Wells and Petty, 1980. For example, behavioral expression. Each subsequent judgments, even if participants are prevented from understanding the meaning of the experiment. Tom et al., 1991, Wells and Petty, 1980. Participants in Wells and Petty's study were asked to move their heads vertically, nodding head movement, or horizontally, shaking head movement, while they listened to music or an editorial. The result indicated that participants who had nodded agreed more with the persuasive message than did participants who had shaken their heads, suggesting that overt head movement produced a persuasive impact on individuals. Furthermore, it has been shown that individuals prefer a neutral stimulus, example a pen, when stimuli were presented alongside the axis of the head nodding movement that the participants had just engaged in. Tom et al., 1991. These results demonstrated that the head nodding movement produced positive attitudes toward neutral or novel objects, whereas head shaking movements caused more negative attitudes. Osugi and Kawahara 17. In the present study, we examined whether models nodding and shaking head motions enhanced recipients' trait impressions, such as attractiveness, likability, and approachability. To test this, we used movie clips of computer-generated, CG, characters, female, by using three-dimensional, 3D, modeler and renderer. Given that head motions of a CG model, i.e., nodding and shaking motion, prime social messages representing approval and denial, such motions would be expected to modulate recipients' trait impressions of model faces. We assessed facial impression under three motion conditions: nodding, shaking, and control. No motion, Figure 1. In Experiment 1, observers viewed 3D models under three motion conditions and rated the likability and approachability of individual models. In Experiment 2, the inquiry about likability was replaced with attractiveness to generalize the endings. In Experiment 3, we examined whether likability regarding appearance and personality are affected by the nodding and shaking motions. Experiment 1. The present experiment was designed to measure the rating scores for facial likability and approachability under the nodding, shaking, and control, no motion, conditions. If facial likability and approachability were evaluated solely based on a target group's facial appearance, then the rating scores under the nodding and shaking conditions were the same as that under the control condition. In contrast, if facial likability and approachability were rated by integrating available socially related information, including nodding and shaking head motions, the nodding condition would be higher rating scores than other two conditions. Similarly, we would also predict that the rating scores under the shaking condition would be lower than the control condition. 0102030405 0607080910 11 12 13 14 15. Figure 1. Examples of 3D CG models used in the present study. 18 Perception 47, 1. Methods. Participants. In total, 16 Japanese observers, mean age, 19.3 years, SD 140.8, 11 females, who were naive to the experimental purpose, participated. All had self-reported normal or corrected to normal vision. We determined the number of participants to maintain consistency with our previous study, Experiment 6 in Osugi and Kawahara, 2015. Therefore, we did not estimate sample size before starting the experiment. Nonetheless, a power analysis using G*power, Erdfelder, Fall, and Buchner, 1996, was carried out to determine whether the sample size of the present study was sufficient to obtain the same size as that of the previous study. The calculated minimal sample size was 10 to obtain the expected in two-tailed t-tests with a power of 0.95 based on the size of the previous study, DZ 1/4 1.3, calculated from data of the bending forward, bowing, and standing still, control, conditions, M1/4 53.0 and 43.9, SD 1/4 12.4 and 9.0, respectively. R 1/4 0.84. Therefore, sample sizes of the present experiments 1 to 3, and 1/4 16, 17, and 16, respectively, should be sufficient to examine the of head movement. The study was approved by the Human Research Ethics Committee of Hokkaido University and that of Senshu University. Participants gave written informed consent. Prior to the experiment, apparatus and stimuli. The stimuli were displayed on a LCD monitor, LL193AB, sharp 1280-1024 pixels, controlled by a computer using MATLAB environment, MathWorks. And the Psychophysics Toolbox, Brainerd, 1997, Kleiner et al., 2007, Pelly, 1997. The viewing distance was approximately 60 centimeters. Face stimuli, 48 CG faces, were generated randomly with East Asian parameters with diarrhent clothing and hairstyles. Using FaceGen Modeler 3.5, Singular Inversions, Toronto. These face parameters were applied to a 3D model, Genesis 1, DAS 3D, Salt Lake City, Utah, under the environment with DAS Studio, DAS 3D, Salt Lake City, Utah. We used a feigned smile to examine nodding and shaking head motions and to simulate natural conversational circumstances. See supplementary material. Although we controlled the facial expression parameter to a faint smile, the values of this parameter varied for each face within a range of neutral expressions or a faint smile because the magnitude of facial expression also depends on facial appearance. The animation of the nodding and shaking motions were also created using DAS Studio and applied to models. All 3D face stimuli subtended 17.4 centimeters vertically and 17.4 centimeters horizontally. Design and procedure. The experiment consisted of 2 sessions, familiarization and test sessions, as used in the study of Osugi and Kawahara, 2015, who originally intended to mitigate substantially negative responses for the RST few faces in the test session. This familiarization procedure also seemed to reduce the uncanny valley impressions. Mori, 2012. In the familiarization session, participants viewed a stream of the 3D CG models used in the test session, see Figure 1. Each identity was presented successively. During the stream, duration, 1s and ISI, 1s. In the test session, participants rated the faces under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions. There was a total of 144 trials. 3 condition 48 models, in this session. Trials were presented to the participants in random order. Each identity of 3D model was assigned with equal frequency to the 3 conditions. And they presented 3 times, Figure 2. Each trial started with the upright faces gazing forward for 500 milliseconds, followed by motion sequences under the nodding and shaking condition. 700 milliseconds. Under the nodding condition, the head was tilted to the downside, approximately 4, and then came back to the original orientation along the sagittal plane. This sequence, Osugi and Kawahara 19, was repeated twice for the motion sequence. Under the shaking condition, the head was turned left and right, each for approximately 4, along the transverse plane, twice, for the same duration. After the completion of the sequence, participants evaluated 2 characteristics of the person, one after another. First, they rated subjective likability by clicking a point on a Likert scale ranging from 0, dislike, to 100, like, that was presented. Under the stimulus, participants were asked to rate the likability of the model based on their own criteria. Second, they rated approachability by the same scale ranging from 0, unapproachable, to 100, approachable. The order of the responses was XED. Participants had unlimited time to respond, self-paced. The next trial began after presentation of a masking display, random noise patch, for 1 second. The experiment lasted 30 minutes. 500 milliseconds. 700 milliseconds. 500 milliseconds. 050 100. Control nodding shaking. Figure 2. A schematic diagram of the stimulus sequence. Upright faces remain static for the first 500 milliseconds, followed by a 700 milliseconds period of nodding or shaking motion under the nodding and shaking conditions. The faces remain static for the entire 1200 milliseconds under the control condition. Participants evaluated 2. Characteristics of the person using a visual analog scale, 0 to 100, that appeared under the faces 500 milliseconds after the end of the motion sequences. 20 Perception 47, 1. Results. Figure 3 shows the mean rating scores under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions. For perceived likability and approachability. The mean rating score for likability under the nodding condition was approximately 18% higher relative to the scores under the shaking and control conditions. We conducted analysis of variance on the rating score with the motion condition, nodding, shaking, and control conditions, as the within subjects factor, and Holmes test for multiple comparisons. We also calculated the Bayes factor, BF, using JASP, Love et al., 2015. BF is the ratio by which the alternative hypothesis is favored over the null hypothesis. The result revealed a significant mean ect for likability, F, 2. 30, 1/4 19.97, p.001, p2, and 1/4 0.62, bf 1/4 59,391.6. Multiple comparisons indicated that the mean of perceived likability in the nodding condition was higher than those under the control and shaking conditions, t, 15, 1/4 4.77, p.001, r 1/4 0.81, bf 1/4 375.16, respectively. By contrast, no significant difference was observed between the shaking and control conditions, t, 15, 1/4 1.79, p 1/4 0.09, r 1/4 0.42, bf 1/4 0.94. The same analysis for perceived approachability showed that the ratings of the control condition was higher than the rating of the shaking condition and lower than the nodding condition, t, 15, 1/4 2.7, p 1/4 0.016, r 1/4 0.57, bf 1/4 3.64 and t, 15, 1/4 5.29, p 0.001, r 1/4 0.81. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Mean rating score 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Approachability likability. Asterisk. Figure 3. Mean rating scores for subjective likability and approachability under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions in Experiment 1. Error bars represent 95% cis estimated by Loftus and Masson, 1994, S. Method. Asterisks connected with the solid lines indicate significant levels between conditions, p. Osugi and Kawahara 21. BF 1/4 311.99, respectively. The ratings of the nodding condition was also higher than the rating of the shaking condition, t, 15, 1/4 5.48, p.001, r 1/4 0.82, bf 1/4 429.77. Discussion. The rating scores for facial likability and approachability under the nodding condition were higher than those under the shaking and control conditions. This ending suggested that the nodding behavior enhanced subjective likability by activating approach-related motivations. In contrast, the rating for facial likability under the shaking condition did not differ from the score under the control condition, indicating that avoidance-related motivation, perceived by a shaking motion, did not decrease subjective likability. Although the rating for approachability under the shaking condition was lower than that of the control condition. This asymmetric impact of social motion cues suggested that perception of approachability changed by both approach and avoidance motivation information, whereas only approach-related information, signaled by the nodding head motion, equated the perception of facial likability. These results suggest that nodding contributes greatly to creating a positive facial impression by activating approach-related motivations under the present situation. Experiment 2. Experiment 1 revealed that the nodding, but not shaking, motion enhanced the facial likability of the models. One remaining question was whether the benefits of the nodding head motion were specific to likability judgments. To examine this issue of generality, we replaced the likability judgment with an attractiveness judgment. A previous study demonstrated that attractiveness was more related to facial appearance than likability, Willis and Todorov. 2006. Also, a recent study showed that perceived physical attractiveness was enhanced by a mere tilting motion of portraits, mimicking bowing, example osugi and kawahara, 2015. This ending suggested that social cues could be combined with physical characteristics, such as facial appearance. Thus, it is conceivable that the nodding head motion can also equate evaluations regarding facial appearance. Methods. A diarrhea group of 17 observers, mean age, 19.5 years, SD 1/4 1.3, 12 females, who were naive to the experimental purpose, participated. The stimuli, apparatus, and procedures were identical to those used in Experiment 1, except that participants rated the physical attractiveness, instead of the likability in Experiment 1, followed by a rating of approachability. Results and discussion. Figure 4 reveals the mean rating scores under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions for perceived attractiveness and approachability. An analysis of variance of attractiveness. Indicated significant main equed, F, 2, 32, 1/4 4.81, P 1/4 0.02, P2 and 1/4 0.23, BF 1/4 3.5, and approachability, F, 2, 32, 1/4 16.99, P.001, P2 and 1/4 0.52, BF 1/4 429.77. Multiple comparisons of the approachability scores showed a similar trend to that in Experiment 1, rating scores under the nodding condition were higher than those under the shaking and control conditions, T, 16, 1/4 4.23, P 1/4 0.001, R 1/4 0.73, BF 1/4 55.95 and T, 16, 1/4 4.74, P 0.001, R 1/4 0.77. 22 Perception 47, 1. BF 1/4 140.49, respectively. Also, the marginally significant difference between the control and shaking conditions was observed, T, 16, 1/4 2.11, P 1/4 0.05, R 1/4 0.47, BF 1/4 1.45. These results indicated that nodding and shaking activated approach-related and avoidance-related motivations, respectively. However, the attractiveness scores did not exhibit the same trends as the results of Experiment 1. Although the nodding condition was more attractive than in the control condition, T, 16, 1/4 3.48, P 1/4 0.009, R 1/4 0.66, BF 1/4 14.38, the shaking condition was not less attractive than the nodding or the control conditions. T, 16, 1/4 1.85, P 1/4 0.16, R 1/4 0.42, BF 1/4 1.0 and T, 16, 1/4 0.85, P 1/4 0.41, R 1/4 0.21, BF 1/4 0.34. Respectively. The rate of increase under the nodding relative to the control conditions in Experiment 2, 9%, was greatly reduced relative to that in Experiment 1, 18%. This Apparent diarrhence was supported by the result of a one-tailed t-test, the rate of increase in experiment 2 was significantly smaller than experiment 1, t, 31, 1/4 1.80, p 1/4 0.041, r 1/4 0.31, bf 1/4 2.12. These results suggested that the nodding mildly eked perceptions of physical attractiveness. In experiments 1 and 2, we collected two responses in AXED order, i.e., likability, followed by approachability in experiment 1 and attractiveness followed by approachability in experiment 2. One could argue that this thing might introduce an order eked and contaminate the approachability scores. However, we believe that the order eked of these responses was negligible because the approachability scores in experiment 2, in which the participants reported the attractiveness rating followed by approachability, were very similar to those obtained in experiment 1, even though the trend in the attractiveness judgment differed substantially from that of the likability judgment. Furthermore, the differences between the motion conditions for the approachability judgment were larger than those for the likability and attractiveness judgments, although the difference in the second judgment should be smaller than that on the RST1 if the order eked of these responses is critical. These results are not consistent with the order eked explanation that nodding and shaking did not eked approachability directly. 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Mean rating score approachability attractiveness. Figure 4. Mean rating scores for subjective attractiveness and approachability under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions in experiment 2. Error bars represent 95% CIS estimated by Loftus and Masson. 1994, S method. Asterisks connected with the solid lines indicate significant levels between conditions. P. Osugi and Kawahara 23. Experiment 3. Previous two experiments indicated that nodding provided a more robust improvement eked on likability than on attractiveness ratings. A possible reason for this difference could be due to the specificity of the trait impression. Nodding is related to the judgment of personality traits rather than that of physical appearance. To test this possibility more directly, we measured likability attributable to personality traits and that due to physical appearance in the same experimental design. Method. A different group of 16 observers, mean age, 20.5 years, SD 1/4 1.9, 9 females, who were naive to the experimental purpose, participated. In this experiment, participants rated likability attributable to personality traits and that due to physical appearance. Results and discussion. Figure 5 indicates the mean ratings under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions for likability attributable to personality and that due to physical appearance. We found significant mean ekes of motion conditions for likability attributable to physical appearance, F, 2, 30, 1/4 5.63, p.001, p2, and 1/4 0.55. BF 1/4 3189.42. Multiple comparisons of the likability scores attributable to physical appearance showed a similar trend to the results in experiment 2, in which participants rated physical attractiveness. The rating under the nodding condition was significantly higher than that under the control condition, T, 15, 1/4 3.35, P 1/4 0.012, R 1/4 0.66, BF 1/4 11.05. However, there was no difference between the nodding and shaking conditions or between the shaking 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Mean rating score 30, 40, 50, 60, 70. Likeability about appearance, likeability about personality. Figure 5. Mean rating scores for subjective likeability about appearance and personality under the nodding, shaking, and control conditions in Experiment 3. Error bars represent 95% cis estimated by Loftus and Masson, 1994, S method. Asterisks connected with the solid lines indicate significant levels between conditions, p. 24 perception 47, 1. And control conditions, t. 15, 1/4 2.14, p 1/4.098, r 1/4.48, bf 1/4 1.53 and t. 15, 1/4 1.23, p 1/4.24, r 1/4.31, bf 1/4 0.49, respectively. One-tailed t-tests revealed that the rate of increase under the nodding relative to control conditions for likability attributable to physical appearance, 6%, was significantly smaller than that in Experiment 1, 18%, t. 30, 1/4 2.75, p 1/4.005, r 1/4.45, bf 1/4 10.06, and comparable to the value in Experiment 2, 9%, t. 31, 1/4 0.96, p 1/4.17, r 1/4.17, bf 1/4 0.75. In contrast, multiple comparisons of the likability scores attributable to personality traits showed a trend similar to the results in Experiment 1. Likability. Specifically, the rating under the nodding condition was higher than those under the shaking and control conditions, t. 15, 1/4 4.52, p 0.001, r 1/4 0.81, bf 1/4 356.97, respectively. There were no significant difference between ratings under the shaking and control conditions, t. 15, 1/4 0.91, p 1/4 0.38, r 1/4 0.23, bf 1/4 0.37. Furthermore, one-tailed t-tests revealed that the rate of increase under the nodding relative to the control conditions for likability attributable to personality traits, 19%, was significantly larger than that in Experiment 2, 9%, t. 31, 1/4 2.51, p 1/4 0.009, r 1/4 0.45, bf 1/4 6.48, and comparable to the value in Experiment 1, 18%, t. 30, 1/4 0.69, p 1/4 0.25, r 1/4 0.13, bf 1/4 0.58. These results suggested that nodding behavior primarily enhanced perceived likability of the model regarding personality traits rather than that due to physical appearance. General discussion. In the present study, we examined whether models nodding and shaking head motions enhanced recipients' trait impressions, such as attractiveness, likability, and approachability by using the motion clips of CG models. The results of Experiment 1 indicated that the mean rating scores of subjective likability and approachability of the nodding CG models were higher than those under the shaking or control conditions. However, nodding and shaking were not counterparts, acting as opposing valences, in that the impact of the shaking motion was limited. Specifically, the rating for approachability, but not for likability, under the shaking condition was lower than in the control condition. Additional experiments demonstrated that the nodding motion primarily enhanced subjective likability due to personality traits rather than subjective attractiveness. Experiment 2, or likability attributable to facial appearance, Experiment 3. These results suggest that nodding motion enhances perceived likability of the 3D CG face via activating cognitive scheme regarding approach-related motivations. As noted in the introduction, several social signals, example gaze direction and facial expressions, are likely to trigger various processes that may form a person's trait. Impressions, example Conway, Jones, De Bruin, and Little, 2008. A recent study, Osugi and Kawahara, 2015, has extended this idea by indicating that vertical head movements such as bowing also elicit facial impressions. Osugi and Kawahara, 2015, suggested that bowing sends messages regarding social intentions, attitudes, and interpersonal relationships, resulting that bowing motion elicits the subjective attractiveness of the bower. Similarly, the present study showed that the nodding movement modulated perceived trait impressions of 3D CG model faces, such as attractiveness, likability, and approachability, suggesting that the human cognitive system interprets and rates facial impressions by associating head movements, example nodding, with positive valence, example approval. Several researchers, example Adams and Kleck, 2003, showed that social information, such as shift in gaze, facial expression, and bodily gestures of the models, convey social cues regarding whether observers should avoid or approach the sender of the cues. Because humans can readily detect another's intention to avoid or approach in social interaction. Osugi and Kawahara 25. Example Adams and Kleck, 2003, human cognitive systems would be likely to acquire knowledge of such social cues through several information sources. The present study demonstrated that the approachability judgment was changed markedly depending on the type of head movement. The results suggested that nodding and shaking head motions activate cognitive schemas related to approach and avoidance tendency, example Wells and Petty, 1980, and Inyans and actors' trait impressions. We suggest that such inferences would create person impressions effortlessly and quickly without intention from minimal information and extensive decisions involving social selection. The present results suggested that a nodding motion of actors enhances their likability. Although nodding and shaking motions have various semantic functions in the process of communication, example McClave, 2000, previous studies involving nodding and shaking movement focused mainly on embodied cognition, such as interactions between self-behavior, body feedback, and judgment of external stimuli, example Forster and Strack, 1996. These studies indicated that a nodding head movement produced positive attitudes toward neutral or novel objects, whereas a shaking head movement caused more negative attitudes. For example, ending of Wells and Petty, 1980, supports a mechanism of response compatibility between the head movement and internal thoughts. A nodding head movement is compatible with, and facilitates, the generation of favorable thoughts and inhibits the production of counter-arguments. The present study showed that merely observing another's behavior produced perceived positive attitudes on the head of actors. We argue that the actor's head movement, compatible with favorable trait impressions, facilitated favorable judgments, resulting in a positive effect in relation to trait impression. It is notable that the present results revealed that the nodding but not the shaking motions equated evaluation of an actor's trait impression. This asymmetric impact of social motion cues may be due to the valence of the stimulus used in the present study. Forster, 2004, demonstrated that an observer's judgment can also be influenced by the valence of the stimulus as well as by head nodding or shaking movements of the observer. More specifically, a head nodding movement in the observer increased the likability of positive valence products, example potato chips, relative to the control motionless condition, but did not equal the evaluation of negative valence ones, example beef lung. In contrast, the shaking Head motion decreased the likability of negative valence products but did not eat positive valence ones. These endings suggested that an asymmetric impact of social motion cues can be attributed to matching between the valence of the stimulus and movement of the observer. The same was true in the present study. That is, the facial stimulus used in the present study might be perceived as positively valenced because these faces appear faint smile and, thus, these stimuli induced a positive ect of the nodding motion but a negative ect of the shaking motion. Further research is needed to explore possible explanations of these ects. In the present study, nodding and shaking motions induced recipient straight impressions, such as attractiveness, likability, and approachability. However, the generalization of the present results requires a caution because the present study used artificial, CG female faces to control the parameters for nodding and shaking motions across diarrhea faces at the expense of ecological validity of the stimuli. Thus, observers might adopt a strategy for evaluating these faces in the present experimental situation. It remains unclear whether such strategy is used for real people in daily conversational situation. Further study is needed to generalize the present endings to real-world situation. Nonetheless, the present study would provide a useful empirical contribution to the literature in that this is RST to show that merely observing another's subtle body motions produced perceived positive attitudes on the head of actors even in CG characters. 26 Perception 47, 1. Given that artificial faces have been implemented in various circumstances, such as input, interface and video instruction materials, and some studies have found that the principles regarding person perception from physical appearance are consistent across virtual and real world conditions, example Guan, Subrahmanyam, Linares, and Cheng, 2015, systematic investigations of the ect of body motion on the formation of impressions of those gers have not been conducted. In conclusion, the present results demonstrated that the 3D CG model's nodding head motion enhanced perceived likability and approachability, whereas the shaking motion did not enhance these ratings. Furthermore, it was shown that a nodding head motion of the 3D CG models primarily increased likability attributable to personality traits, rather than to physical appearance. We concluded that head nodding motion is treated as information regarding approach-related motivations and enhances perceived likability. Acknowledgement. The authors are grateful to CG Yamagami for providing opportunities for data collection. Declaration of conflicting interests. The author, S., declared no potential conflicts of interest with respect to the research, authorship, and/or publication of this article. Funding. The author, S., disclosed receipt of the following financial support for the research, authorship, and/or publication of this article. This work was supported by grant in aid from MEXT Kakenhai 16K13503 to JK. Supplementary material. Supplementary material is available for this article online. References. Adams, RBJR, and Kleck, RE. 2003. Perceived gaze direction and the processing of facial displays of emotion. Psychological Science, 14, 644 to 647. doi 10.1046/J.0956-7976.2003.psi_1479.x. Adams, RBJR, and Kleck, RE. 2005. The Eeks of Direct and Averted Gaze on the Perception of Facially Communicated Emotion. Emotion, 5, 3-11. doi 10.1037/1528-3542.5.1.3. Argyle, M., and Cook, M. 1976. Gaze and Mutual Gaze. Cambridge, England, Cambridge University Press. Baron-Cohen, S. 1995. Mind Blindness, an Essay on Autism and Theory of Mind. Cambridge, MA, MIT Press. Brainerd, D.H. 1997. The Psychophysics Toolbox. Spatial Vision, 10, 433-436. doi 10.1163/156856897X00357. Brinal, P., and Petty, R.E. 2003. Overt Head Movements and Persuasion, a Self-Validation Analysis. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, 84, 1123-1139. doi 10.1037/00223514.84.6.1123. Buss, D.M., and Barnes, M. 1986. Preferences in Human Mate Selection. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, 50, 559. doi 10.1037/00223514.50.3.559. Cash, T.F., and Kilcullen, R.N. 1985. The Eye of the Beholder, Susceptibility to Sexism and Beautyism. In the Evaluation of Managerial Applicants. Journal of Applied Social Psychology, 15, 591-605. doi 10.1111/J.1559-1816.1985.TB00903.X. Osugi and Kawahara 27. Castle, J., and Thoresen, K.R. 1999. The Power of a Nod and a Glance, Envelope versus Emotional Feedback in Animated Conversational Agents. Applied Artificial Intelligence, 13, 519-538. doi 10.1080/0883951991173660. Conway, C.A., Jones, B.C., De Bruin, L.M., and Little, A.C. 2008. Evidence for Adaptive Design in Human Gaze Preference. Proceedings of the Royal Society of London B. 275, 63-69. doi 10.1098/. RSPB.2007.1073. Cowie, R., Guns, H., McKeown, G., Vakoschneider, L., Armstrong, J., and Douglas Cowie, E. 2010. The Emotional and Communicative Significance of Head Nods and Shakes in a Naturalistic Database. Paper presented at the Proceedings of LREC International Workshop on Emotion. Valletta, Malta. Dion, K.K. 1977. The Incentive Value of Physical Attractiveness for Young Children. Personality and Social Psychology Bulletin, 3, 67-70. doi 10.1177/014616727600300109. Dixon, J.A., and Foster, D.H. 1998. Gender, Social Context, and Backchannel Responses. Journal of Social Psychology, 138, 134-136. doi 10.1080/002245498096000364. Duncan, S. 1972. Some Signals and Rules for Taking Speaking Turns in Conversations. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, 23, 283-292. doi 10.1037/H00333031. Emory, N.J. 2000. The Eyes Have It, The Neuroetology, Function, and Evolution of Social Gaze. Neuroscience and Biobehavioral Reviews, 24, 581-604. doi 10.1016/S0149-7634, 000025-7. Erdfelder, E., Fall, F., and Buchner, A. 1996. Power, a General Power Analysis Program. Behavior. Research Methods, Instruments, and Computers, 28, 1-11. Fink, B., and Penton-Vogt, I. 2002. Evolutionary Psychology of Facial Attractiveness. Current. Directions in Psychological Science, 11, 154-158. doi 10.1111/1467-8721.00190. Forster, J. 2004. How Body Feedback Influences Consumers' Evaluation of Products. Journal of Consumer Psychology, 14, 415-425. doi 10.1207/S153276663JCP1404_10. Forster, J., and Strack, F. 1996. The Influence of Overt Head Movements on Memory for Valenced Words, A Case of Conceptual Motor Compatibility. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology. 71, 421-430. doi 10.1037/00223514.71.3.421. Guan, SSA, Subrahmanyam, K., Linares, K., and Cheng, R. 2015. Beauty in the Eye of the Beholder. Attractiveness in a Virtual World. Cyberpsychology, Journal of Psychosocial Research. On Cyberspace, 9, Article 2. doi 10.5817/CP2015-2-2. Helwig Larson, M., Cunningham, S.J., Carico, A., and Pergram, A.M. 2004. To Nod or Not to Nod. An observational study of nonverbal communication and status in female and male college students. Psychology of Women Quarterly, 28, 358-361. doi 10.1111/J.1471-6402.2004.00152.x. Jones, B.C., De Bruin, L.M., Little, A.C., Conway, C.A., and Feinberg, D.R. 2006. Integrating Gaze. Direction and Expression in Preferences for Attractive Faces. Psychological Science, 17, 588-591. doi 10.1111/J.1467-9280.2006.01749.x. Camp, KKW, Frith, CD, Dolan, RJ, and Frith, U. 2001. Reward Value of Attractiveness and Gaze. Nature, 413, 589. doi 10.1038/350981149. Kyler, R.E., and Leder, H. 2016. Trusting the Looks of Others, Gaze of Faces in Social Settings. Perception, 45, 875-892. doi 10.1177/03010066166436678. Kleiner, M., Brainerd, D., Pelly, D., Ingling, A., Murray, R., and Broussard, C. 2007. What's New in Psych Toolbox 3. Perception, 36, 1. doi, 10.1068/v070821. Loftus, Gr., and Masson, M.E. 1994. Using cadence intervals in within subject designs. Psychonomic Bulletin and Review, 1, 476-490. doi, 10.3758/BF03210951. Love, J., Zelka R., Marsman, M., Jamil, T., Verhagen, A.J., Lee, A., and Wagon Makers, E.J. 2015. JASP, version 0.6.6. Retrieved from https://jasp-stats.org. Mason, M.F., Tatkow, E.P., and McRae, C.N. 2005. The Look of Love, Gaze Shifts and Person. Perception. Psychological Science, 16, 236-239. doi, 10.1111/J.0956-7976.2005.00809.x. Maynard, S.K. 1987. Interactional Functions of a Nonverbal Sign, Head Movement in Japanese. Dyadic Casual Conversation. Journal of Pragmatics, 11, 589-606. doi, 10.1016/0378. 2166, 87, 90181-0. Mori, M. 2012. Translated by MacDorman, K.F., Kageki, Nori. The Uncanny Valley. IEEE. Robotics and Automation, 19, 98-100. doi 10.1109/MRA.2012.21928111. 28 Perception 47, 1. McClave, E.Z. 2000. Linguistic Functions of Head Movements in the Context of Speech. Journal of Pragmatics, 32, 855-878. doi, 10.1016/S0378-2166, 99, 00079X. Oosterhoff, N.N., and Todorov, A. 2008. The Functional Basis of Face Evaluation. Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences of the USA, 105, 11087-11092. doi 10.1073/NIS.08056641105. Oosterhoff, N.N., and Todorov, A. 2009. Shared Perceptual Basis of Emotional Expressions and Trustworthiness Impressions from Faces. Emotion, 9, 128-133. doi 10.1037/00145520. Osugi, T., and Kawahara, J.I. 2015. Eeks of Bowing on Perception of Attractiveness. Attention. Perception, and Psychophysics, 77, 1697-1714. doi 10.1163/156856897X00366. Pelly, D.G. 1997. The Video Toolbox Software for Visual Psychophysics, Transforming Numbers into Movies. Spatial Vision, 10, 437-442. doi 10.1163/156856897X00366. Porter, M.A., Coldhart, M., and Langdon, R. 2007. The Neuropsychological Basis of Hypersociability. In Williams and Down Syndrome. Neuropsychology, 45, 2839-2849. doi 10.1016 j.neuropsychology.2007.05.006. Rees, H.T., Wilson, I.M., Monstier, C., Bernstein, S., Clark, K., Seidel, E. Ratuane, K. 1990. What is Smiling is Beautiful and Good. European Journal of Social Psychology, 20, 259-267. doi 10.1002/edges.24202000307. Segal, H., and Ostrov, N. 1975. Beautiful but Dangerous, Eeks of Ender Attractiveness and Nature. Of the Crime on Juridic Judgments. Journal of Personality and Social Psychology, 31, 410-414. doi 10.1037/H00764772. Todorov, A., Mandasija, A.N., Goran, A., and Hall, C.C. 2005. Inferences of Competence from Faces. Predict Election Outcomes. Science, 308, 1623-1626. doi 10.1126/science.1110589. Tom, G., Pedersen, P., Lau, T., Burton, T., and Cook, J. 1991. The Role of Overt Head Movement in the Formation of EACT. Basic and Applied Social Psychology, 12, 281-289. doi 10.1207/ S1532484 BASP 1203_3. Tom, G., Ramel, E., Zapanta, I., Demir, K., and Lopez, S. 2006. The Role of Overt Head Movement and Attention in Persuasion. Journal of Psychology, 140, 247-253. doi 10.30.200/JRLP.140.3.247-253. Wells, G. L., and Petty, R. E. 1980. The Eeks of Overt Head Movements on Persuasion, Compatibility, and Incompatibility of Responses. Basic and Applied Social Psychology, 1, 219-230. doi 10.1207/ S1532484 BASP 0103_2. Willis, J., and Todorov, A. 2006. First Impressions, Making Up Your Mind After 100 Milliseconds Exposure to a Face. Psychological Science, 17, 592-598. doi 10.1111/J.1467-9280.2006.01750.x. Osugi and Kawahara 29.